Thanks for taking the time to tune in. I'm a local community college student who wanted to make an introductory video on some of the techniques I noticed being used on campus, inside of the classrooms, and with certain types of literature, and probably open discussions and begin laying the groundwork for the criteria that will be used to determine if a professor, if literature or activities will be accurately categorized as anti-white in nature. This is pretty complicated when you understand literary structure. So there are a lot of topics, intersections, and moving parts. I won't get into them today because this is an introductory video, but I'm going to try to explain it uh, in a very understandable and simple way. The first step in understanding anti-white material is first you have to understand what white means. When you hear your professor use the term white or white people, you have to look closely at it and say, well, in what way? The term white currently is used in multiple different contexts. And you'll see here one of the contexts that you can use them in is the context of color. This is based on visual observation. When you refer to people in the context of color, you're referring to them as white, as black, as yellow, or as brown people. Again, based on visual observation, you can tell just by looking at them. So in this context, when you say white people, someone will assume a person with European features, which is the most commonly the way we see it used. When we see media, TV, movies, whatever, when they say the term white and openly refer to someone, it is based on the context of color and visual observation, and it's usually a European person there. Another context it's used in is the context of race. Now, in the context of race, this is a much broader category. And basically, it encompasses everyone who is not considered black or Asian. So when you use it in this context, you have people from the Middle East, North Africa, you have people who are Hispanic and Latino categories are in there, you have the European peoples or the original peoples of Europe, and you also have folks of Jewish origin. Understanding when teachers move back and forth in between these contexts is key to understanding whether or not you're dealing with anti-white literature. So let's back up a second and point out that it is no secret that all things white on campus are basically thought of or taught to be bad. They're degraded. Um, Teachers do not show any sort of favoritism towards them. And it's not hard to find when you Google it or when you look it up, there is no shortage of people who want the white identity to be abolished. You have these radicalized professors here who say that they want to abolish the identity, the peoples, the race, whatever. They just want it gone. They want to abolish it and to destroy it, not dismantle it or deconstruct it, but they want to actually destroy it. So I'm going to be pointing out today the way that they build some sort of that animus simply by the wording in their literature. The document I have pulled up here, obviously you can see it's from 1997. This is from the Whiteness Studies program. And one of the things I'd like to point out is about this program right here, it does say abolition is first of all a political project. The abolitionists study whiteness in order to abolish it. There is no sort of pluralism or anything that's being promoted here. This is a means of destruction. Okay, so keep that in mind as we discuss this. So obviously we'll see activists in public, we'll see angry student unions, they'll say all sorts of terrible things. And I kind of looked at it and I wondered, how is this accomplished to condition people to feel that way on such a mass scale? And I began looking at the literary structures of literature that was put in front of us, or the certain way that teachers reference things, or the way that they say things. So I'm going to give you an example with me being the teacher, and then I'll kind of touch on this from a higher level. If I'm a teacher and I have a classroom full of people in front of me, I know that there are certain things I can say to achieve a desired reaction from that room full of people. I can say things that may make them laugh or feel happy. I can make them feel suspense or anxiety. I can make them feel angry at each other and fight amongst each other, or I can make them feel angry at a common cause, not fighting with each other, but maybe feeling some sort of unity at this one focal point of their anger. Now, naturally, if I pick one focal point for all of my lessons, subtly and over time, that class's feelings will compound on that focal point. And depending what I told them will determine whether or not they are positive or negative towards that focal point. So here's an example. Let's say I'm a teacher who does not like cats. I hate them. So in my class, I will make all my comparisons to cats. I will talk to my class about what I feel is wrong with cats in general, what I do not like about cats personally. My lessons will be about the terrible things cats have done in my neighborhood for the last several decades, how they wreak havoc on the local birds or the gophers. I may even show favoritism when I refer to dogs, birds, or my pet fish when making comparisons between them and cats. Now, if I do this for 9 months, day in and day out, it is a form of conditioning. The odds are good that I may have taken or started with a class full of students who have felt positively or maybe even neutrally toward cats. And by the end of that semester, I could have converted a number of them to now dislike cats or take a political or even hostile action towards them whenever they encounter them. You see, by making all comparisons to cats, not only did I create animosity inside of my classroom, I was now able to steer it towards cats and cause some serious problems for the cats in multiple neighborhoods, which probably never would have happened in the first place had I not made this the goal or the object of my teachings. It's important to also note that this is a form of tunnel vision, meaning that all things outside of the focal point are invalidated and not mentioned. My students will never know about them. If dogs did something bad recently, my students will never know about it because all of my comparisons will only be made to cats. Dogs are never even mentioned. My students' opinions of dogs will not change because of me because we never see them in my literature or we never talk about them in class discussions. Now let's go back to radical professors who openly say that they have made it their goal to abolish white identity, race, or peoples as a whole. They openly state that they will make the focal point of their literature or all criticism will be directed at white peoples or white identity. With the intention of assigning baggage to it over time, they know that they will also be encouraging animosity towards it. In order to maximize doing this, they flip back and forth using the term white from the context of color to the context of race. This enables and maximizes the amount of times they're able to use the term white in a derogatory way and assign baggage to it. This also results in mass public animosity towards what the public perceives white people to mean, as it's interpreted differently by whomever is told these things. So when you're in your classroom and your teacher's in the front of the podium saying white people this and white people that, to me, as one student, white people can mean something different than to, let's say, the student next to me. What if the student next to me thinks that it only means European people and it does not mean, let's say an Arab or a Jewish person or whatever? When your professor has made historical references to slave trading on the African continent, commonly they will call them white people, but when you research it deeply, you'll know that a lot of them were actually Arabs. And you may come across the Arab slave trade. If you want to research it, it's pretty old. It's been going for a very long time. From my understanding, it's still going today. And you may also come across the Jewish slave trade. Now, if you're into more radical teachings, I personally enjoy listening to radicals when I get to hear them speak. I've listened to Farrakhan talk on this specific subject, and he has a book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, which kind of points this out. Now, I'd like to point out one thing. When your teachers in classroom this whole time could have been referencing slavery, saying, Arabs this, Moroccans that, Jews this or that, whatever, all those little invalidated, or all those little identities were invalidated and they were all renamed to white people. And the class that I was in, or the classes I've experienced, now think that all of these deeds were done by people who have a European appearance, maybe someone who's Irish, as opposed to someone who, happens to look more like the folks in these pictures, or, wears a turban or even a yarmulke. So by using this white identity here, these subcategories actually bear no responsibility for whatever the subject was that was discussed at hand. Now, we should make note that there's multiple different channels that use this in their literary structure. They say in their lesson plans they will point all criticism at, or they will make all references to, white people. They claim to be discussing various topics depending on the academic lane that you're in. If you are looking at feminism, if you are looking at various forms of cultural studies, or even the more recent history lanes that were opened up to accommodate the new populations, they're all talking about these different topics. It could be inclusion, it could be oppression, it could be whatever. They're making things up daily. But here's the thing. These classes or these lanes are not tackling the subject at hand. They're not attacking the concept of oppression, because when they say from the angle of oppression or from the angle of inclusion, we will make all comparisons to white people in general, all they're actually doing is attacking white people, whoever they think that means, from those various angles. So you can imagine the various types of animosity that now result in all of these different educational lanes, whether it be feminism, whether it be cultural studies, whatever. These things are coming at that identity from multiple different angles, and you condition the student body and you influence them to feel a negative way. And this, from my research, is actually the goal of the studies programs who want this sort of abolition. I'd like to point out that it's pretty easy to tip the scale and point all of this at someone else. You can keep the current literary structure in place, all of the books, all the literature, and cross out who you make the references to. So in the context of color, if I change this and say now all references will be made to brown people, what that now means is that your whole time growing up in school, or when you see things on the media, or when movies are made, whenever the subject would be slavery, you would only be taught about brown people who own slaves. Or when the subject is oppression to women, you will only be taught how brown men are oppressive to women. Everything else is invalidated. Nothing is discussed. That next generation of students will never know it happened because you never included it in your lesson plan. And what you're left with is a room full of students who now feel animosity. Animosity because of the subject that you chose, and animosity because of the way you chose to word things, and the fact that you as a teacher steered that animosity now towards brown people means that all of the hatred, all of the rhetoric today that we see directed at white people would shift and now would be directed to brown people. This is all done with the swipe of a pen and changing whom the literary format is now pointed at. All in all, when you're being presented with literature or discussions inside of the classroom or on campus, first, my recommendation is ask, what's the subject? What are we talking about? You need to determine if this is a subject or a concept that could have been presented in a neutral or non-offensive way, one that does not result in hostility, right? And you need to now grade the way the literature has been worded or structured. Was this presented in a neutral and non-offensive way, or was this reworded and reframed so it's deliberately pointed at white people, identity, and so on? This is how you determine if a literary structure or references will now be categorized as anti-white. Another good point, the next someone in your classroom, your teacher, or someone next to you very commonly or loosely use the term white people, ask them which ones they're referring to. Make sure that you know that they know that there's different kinds. In addition to this video, I've included some vocabulary. This is just the beginnings of how to accurately categorize some of the techniques that are used inside the classroom. Anti-whites in general, these will be individuals or organized movements. They can be politically, religiously, culturally, or racially motivated for the abolition of white identity, race, peoples as a whole, and by all means necessary. Anti-white literature, this is what I touched on in this video. Framing is a strategy where you can use revisionist interpretation, rhetoric, circular logic, or just make up hollow arguments with the intent to frame someone for something solely based on making accusations, but no intention of ever providing any real proof. It's also intentionally rewording or saying something in a way so it results in misplaced blame. This extends to attacks on cultural symbols, fundamentals, foundational norms, intentionally lying about their meaning, not only to manufacture animosity towards them, but to encourage public attacks against them, and also the various forms of unsupported name calling that goes along with that. This said, when you look at the techniques I'm discussing on this video, my recommendation is that you be thoughtful of the other students on campus who are going to be in your position. If your teacher is utilizing anti-white literature, holding activities, or making offhanded remarks that don't even have anything to do with what they're teaching or their subject, make sure that you register this on the Rate My Professor website so other students are at least aware and have a chance to choose a different instructor or a chance to prepare if they have to go to that class. I've included four basic categories below that I put together. One is low, one would be mid, high, and then obviously hostile. I'd recommend choosing from one of these four, maybe elaborating on it or, customizing it so it accurately reflects your experience in that classroom. But the point of this is, as we move forward, as we set the foundations for this, and we begin developing the criteria and the language that we need to accurately capture our experience on campus, is that we are accurate when we do this. You cannot simply call something anti-white because you do not like it. You have to look and make sure that these structures are there and there was a deliberate attempt or some sort of slight or attack on identity or the intent to cause animosity directed your way. Thank you.